Elie Wiesel once said, "We must take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented." Today is Yom Hashoah, a day which we use to commemorate the fact that 6 million of our brothers and sisters were murdered in cold blood by the Nazis during World War II. My grandfather was born in Bonn, in Germany. He was only 8 years old on Kristallnacht when they kicked the door of his house in, marched in, and committed atrocities in front of his very eyes. Thank God he survived. But I do not remember a single time in his life that he was capable of talking with us about what it was that he witnessed in those horrific years leading up to that difficult day. His silence always bothered me. When we say the words "never forget," it issues an ultimatum to generations to ensure that they tell over the story about what happened in that horrific time. In many ways, paralleling our obligation to say over the story of the Jewish people leaving Egypt. It's something that we are anxious, that we are afraid that people will not remember. So we decide and commit to telling over those stories. What had happened with my grandfather and so many like him who died in silence. We read about a tragic story in this week's Parsha where Aharon HaKohen loses 2 of his children in a tragedy on the day of the inauguration of the Mishkan. The words that the Torah uses are Vayidom Aharon. And Aharon recognizes that they made a mistake. Vayidom, and he was quiet. Our Sefarim write that there's a parallel to this expression. Vayidom Hashemesh, and the sun was quiet. These 2 words seem to be diametrically opposed. When the sun is quiet, it's because the sun physically cannot speak. And when Aharon is quiet, it is because Aharon chooses to do so. Why are the 2 sentences linked? There's a brilliant commentary called the Chomat Anach that makes a fascinating point. This Vayidom Hashemesh, the silence of the sun, even though that's its normal state, refers to a specific moment in history where the sun should have spoken, but it did not. It was a time when the sun and the moon were created, and the moon came before God and said, "God, there do not need to be 2 luminaries, both of us shining with great splendor." Its intention was that the sun should be eliminated and it should have the job for itself. But because the moon came forward and made that point, and the sun did not respond, God made the sun itself the primary source of light, and the moon merely a mirror. Vayidom Hashemesh, and the sun was silent. That silence was rewarded. The Talmud says that we learn from this that when a person is insulted, they're abused, they're yelled at, and they remain quiet, they remain silent, he is blessed with a very special blessing. Hane'elavim ve'enam olvim, someone who's embarrassed and does not embarrass back. Shom'in cherpatam ve'enam meshivim, they hear their abuse and they do not respond. And on them it says, ve'ohavav, and those who God loves, kitzet hashemesh b'gvurato, are like the sun that comes out in its strength. The Talmud is referring to that exact moment when the sun heard the attempt to make it small, to denigrate it, and remained silent. And that silence was rewarded with a brilliant luminescence and shine. On the one hand, we think about silence as something that is to be derided. Silence is weakness. On the other hand, there's a very different kind of silence. Sometimes silence is strength. Our society tells us in today's day and age that everything needs to be spoken up and spoken out against. And quite often, that's so right. To remain silent encourages the tormentor, encourages the oppressor. 3/4 of a century ago, we were dying for someone to speak up for us. And I think that is exactly the point. Aaron's silence is powerful It is not cowardice, because as Moshe says, V'chol b'nei Yisrael yivku et haserefa. And the entirety of the Jewish people was crying about the death of these two young men. When the community and the world at large understands your pain, then screaming and railing about it doesn't necessarily show strength. It might show the fact that you need to get something off of your chest, but not because you come from a place of strength. Sometimes people who scream loudly about all the things that have been done to them sink into a victim mentality and never climb out of that place. And they keep telling themselves that it's so important to speak about it, but they define their lives in the aftermath of that tragedy by that tragedy. I think my grandfather didn't speak about it not because he was cowed into silence, but because he did not want to speak about it. He felt that his life should be about everything that came after that time. In the words of Wayne Dyer, everything that's created comes out of silence. Your thoughts emerge from the nothingness of silence. Your words come out of this void. Your very essence emerged from emptiness. All creativity requires some stillness. Silence and stillness. Vayidom, vayidom. On the other hand, there are people who are the parallel opposite, and their words and their silence are equal. There was a woman who passed away today, and a good friend of mine, Rabbi Naftali Schiff, came from her funeral, and he mentioned something that was so beautiful, and I'd like to share this with you. He came directly from the funeral of prisoner number 16320, Mrs. Marta Grunwald, who was buried today on Yom Hashoah at the age of 98. She came with one of the groups that he was leading to Poland with our organization called J-Roots. And she vowed back in the day that she would never spend another night in Poland after the atrocities that the Germans had done to her on their land. She wanted to come with the group though, so she traveled to Vienna to sleep overnight and then got up at 5 o'clock in the morning and drove all the way to Auschwitz. They were pushing her and her brother in their wheelchairs, but as they got to the gates of Auschwitz, she stood up and said, "I walked out of those gates an upright Jew. I'm not going back through those gates in a wheelchair." It was almost like she jumped forward and led with such a great strength a group of 75 young Jews into the camp to tell them about what our people had survived. Someone who wants to speak so badly, who speaks with such energy, tenacity, to the point that she can't even sleep in the country, but she's going to drive there at 5 o'clock in the morning, jump out of her wheelchair to tell the story. Is she different to my grandpa? And I think the answer is that there are different people and different silences. You know, there is too many things in our community that are being swept under the rug, that people are silent about. And finally, in the last few years, people have felt the courage to be able to come forward and speak. And sometimes when they do not have that courage, it requires other people to stand up and speak for them. If the whole community is not behind that thing, then we need to make a great noise so that the evil that exists, even amongst our midst, is exposed and never perpetrated again. But when there are people speaking for you, there's no law that everybody must speak. Some people are more comfortable, are more passionate talking about their experiences, and some people would much rather and feel much more comfortable keeping quiet and trying to move on. No one should be given a very specific methodology of action. The only thing that we ask of them is that their silence should come from a place of strength. When you don't respond and someone's yelling in your face, are you weaker or stronger? That depends on you. Vayidom Aharon. A father who chooses, instead of being consumed by anger, by bitterness, to carry on with the great job that he has for the Jewish people and to allow other people to cry, to speak on his behalf, because he's got a job to do, is no less a hero than Martha Grunwald. Ladies and gentlemen, there are so many kinds of the sound of silence. It is our job to be able to discern where our silence makes us complicit and when our silence is an act of true heroism. Shabbat Shalom.